Hello everyone! I'm greeting you from a very dark and stormy France. Hopefully you're getting some rain in California as well. Wanted to touch base because you should have your preliminary results papers back, and I wanted to talk to people about that a little bit. Once you look at them, you should see that I have given you what I think we all could agree on is getting close to obnoxious levels of feedback. I gave people a lot of notes. That's part because you're at a very crucial stage at this point where, I don't have a lot of instances still to give you feedback before either the final presentation or the final paper. And doing sociological analysis is one of the hardest parts. So I'm going to kind of come back to that again and again, this difference between like just description and analysis. And even for people who have been doing sociology for a long time, it sometimes gets hard to distinguish between the two when you're trying to do them, and you can kind of get vertigo and lose where you're at. So we'll talk about that a little bit. I tried to give you a lot of feedback in the paper, so don't be disheartened when you open it up and there's just like comments everywhere. All of those comments are made with like goodwill towards you, so they're not like trying to beat you down or anything. Part of it too is a lot of your projects, they need some work still, but they're like bordering on some of the coolest projects that we've had in this course for the number of iterations that we've done it. Like a lot of your projects I'm really excited about. And a lot of them aren't fully there yet. Like if you just put in a little more work, you're going to have some really, really cool results. So I want to help you get there. One of the things that I told people a lot, this is more just on style, I'll kind of get that out of the way before I get to the harder things, but I told a lot of people to like be bold and be assertive. And when you're doing qualitative work, you do have to be aware of your limitations, right? You can't say like, well, I interviewed this group of people and now I can tell you how everybody feels about this issue. You can't say that. So you need to acknowledge that, but you want to do that in like a pretty like brief moment in the method section where you're like, this is our method, it's what it allows us to do. And then maybe once again, when you're in the discussion or conclusion section, you say like, hey, we wish that we had more information, we had more access, that we could have talked to more people. But other than those two moments where you're acknowledging your limitations, you don't want to let that language of like hesitancy flow through your entire paper, your entire presentation. Because it kind of undermines what you're arguing and what you're trying to teach people. So know what you can talk about with the data that you have, but then be bold and be assertive about that. So I tried to give you examples in your writing where I'm like, this is a good instance how you're talking about it. And over here, you're undermining your own argument. So try to be bold. Try to make like strong claims. Part of that is that a lot of the projects I see struggling with this kind of difference between qualitative and quantitative work. In the university, you probably run into a lot where people want to make some observation and say, I learned this thing and it applies in all places and all times. And that's how you can tell that it's really cool. In sociology, we don't always do that. That's one type of method, but it tends to be more quantitative, and it has lots of flaws and drawbacks as well. So most of these projects are more qualitative, and you don't have to say that your findings are generalizable, and you don't want to try to argue that they are, because then you're setting yourself up to try to defend something that you can't defend. So your data needs to match your argument. You went out, you asked people about certain issues, or you had them write short answer things, or you went and observed something. Try to find what you can argue based off of that data. Often that means that you can't say like, I can tell you about how all students in all campuses at universities work. But you can say, this is how these people understood what was happening, or this is how people responded to this situation. So try to go deeper rather than broader, and that's something that shows up in my feedback a lot. Let's see. Okay, so you all also have a lot of data, right? Most of you have done qualitative stuff, you've interviewed 20, 30 people or something. maybe for as long as an hour. So you just have all of this information that's like washing over you. That's really cool, but don't get overwhelmed and don't get lost. So in a lot of papers too, I refer to like being lost in the woods. And you've got so much stuff in front of you that you just, like, you want to go down this trail and you want to go down that trail, and it can end up kind of like scattered, and you don't want to be scattered. You want to have like a vision and a path, and you want to think that you're like leading your reader through these woods where there's all this stuff going on and saying like, okay, yeah, there's a lot going on, but this is the important thing and this is what we're going to focus on. So follow me and let's go. So don't get overwhelmed by all of the data that you have. Try to find your way through it. One of the challenges that people ran into fairly consistently, actually, is the preliminary results paper is not a methodology paper. And I had a lot of people spend a lot of the paper showing me like what their method was. There's a different section that you should have been doing that in. So this section is about saying, like, you want to maybe very briefly like catch me up to what your method was, so that when you show me your results and talk about them, I understand how you got them. But that should have been a very, very brief lead-in. So I pulled up the prompt, and I'm looking at it, and I'm just going to read like a little snippet from it. So, and you should always be checking the prompts for all your papers in all your classes. Prompts are really helpful. But the one for this paper says, provide insights into how you are analyzing data, facts, figures, and what insights you are preliminarily making in your analysis. Tell us what you are analyzing, why you are analyzing it, and what is important about your findings. So don't just show me your data, and that's something that I saw a lot of people accidentally slip into. Maybe because you have so much of that data and it's kind of the overwhelming thing, where people would just say like, oh man, I've got all this stuff over here. I've got all of this stuff over here. I've got all this stuff over here. Well, we're out of time. That's all I had to show you. That is not what this paper was trying to push you to do. So you need to organize your data. You need to find what the major trends are, and then you need to make an argument about what you see, what's important. And you need to try to argue that important lesson like to me as your reader. So don't just show me your data. A way that you can tell if you're doing this or not, one way that kind of helps is you should be connecting to theories, terms, concepts, course readings, stuff from your literature review. You should have some citations in this paper, and almost nobody did. Some people were starting to analyze, but very few people connected their data to the kind of literature that they had read for the literature review. So I've got my list here again, as usual. Yeah, I guess I would say that is kind of my general feedback for everybody is look at my notes and try to boil down very quickly what you think your argument is about the phenomenon that you're researching. What sociological theories, concepts, terms, authors help you understand what you saw in your data. You know, if you were looking at how people interact in dating, and you're like, oh man, you know, Goffman's dramaturgy, front stage, backstage, totally has a ton to say about this. Then in your analysis, you need to be drawing connections between Goffman and what you saw. And don't just throw in Goffman and be like, hey, Goffman explains this. Done. That was kind of the same thing I was talking about with the midterm, where you can't just throw out the theory. You need to have specific examples where you're saying, I can tell that Goffman is helping here because I interviewed this person and they said X, Y, Z, and that's a perfect example of this thing that Goffman was talking about. And try to be critical, you know, don't just say that one theory like explains everything necessarily. It usually helps when you're like, well, you know, Goffman explains this interview, but there was this other interview that Goffman doesn't explain, and so now we have to come up with a way how we're going to understand that. And I, as the author, am telling you, as the reader, that I think we should understand it this way because of these reasons. So, like I said, I've tried to keep this really simple and brief, but it's a really like tricky process to take your like forest of data and try to boil it down into a really simple argument and connect it to theories and concepts. That is not easy. So for the people that were further along in that process, I tried to give you good feedback to tell you like when I thought it was working and when I thought it wasn't working. There are a couple papers where your feedback was mostly just me saying like you really need to do this process. Either way, you should be continuing to practice this, and if you have questions, contact me. This is one of the scenarios where it's much easier for me to help you over Skype than email. It's like too specific and too nuanced. If you can't do Skype, I can try to email you some thoughts, but it's going to be harder. But getting as much feedback as you can. Your group members should be helping each other too, right? Like you should be bouncing ideas off of each other and saying like, do we think this works? Do we think it's not working? Are we presenting an argument that makes sense? Are we supporting that argument? Yeah, but again, I want to end too with not like all doom and gloom about like how difficult this process is. Like it's kind of fun, right? Like trying to take this like huge array of information that you've gone out and found. Nobody else has this information, right? Like you gathered it, and you get to tell us what's cool about it, and get to change like my mind as the reader about how I understand this phenomenon. To me, that's super cool. And a lot of you are like swimming around in really cool topics. You've got really cool data. If you can just like finish the argument, you're gonna have a really awesome product. So I'm looking forward to these projects as they move forward. And as usual, any way that I can help, just let me know. All right, have a good one.